And the answer here has to do with this word, which someone is now going to explain to me.
Is it just to make it sound good as they're reading along?
It has to do with the sound of it as they're reading along, but what about it?
It's to make you stop and think for a minute, right?
It's to signal that it's time to pause. It's because it's the last word of the verse. Remember, we mentioned this the other day. Vowels will sometimes shift around and do unusual things over two spots in the Hebrew verse. One is the very last word before the sof pasuk, the end mark. Where else will they shift like this? Above the atnach in the middle of the verse. Okay, so those two big pauses will cause at the end or over atnach. You'll get these kind of vowel shifts, and that's why this is shifted. So if you're going to parse im-ka, it's im plus the pronoun suffix second masculine singular, even though it looks second feminine singular. Tyson?
With the quotation part there, is it okay to switch it? Because I thought it sounded weird, so I would go do all it is in.
Yes. We would normally put the imperatives first. Yep. So what does this do in the Hebrew? I mean, Hebrew could have easily, in fact, it normally would have wanted to have the imperatives first as well. And and Nathan said to the king, "Go, do everything that is in your heart, for Yahweh is with you." What's this do to the feel and the meaning of things to have this prepositional phrase up front? Or it's not the prepositional phrase, it's the direct object, right? Everything which is in your heart, go, do.
David's a person after God's own heart.
Well, there is that. David is the king after God's own heart. And yet, what's this maybe stressing? Here it's kind of stressing, okay, here, these are human thoughts. Right? These are David's plans, but they aren't necessarily God's plans. And we're going to find that out as the story goes on. It's also interesting that this is the prophetic oracle to David, right? David says this to Nathan, and Nathan, as the prophet of God, says, "Go. Everything that's in your heart, go, do. For Yahweh is with you." And then, what's going to happen? Verse 4. Tim, verse 4.
And it came to pass in the night that the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying, "Go and say to my servant David, thus says the Lord, you shall build to me."
Oh, hold on a second. Verse 4. Good job. So, and it came to pass, you said, and then just go ahead and give me your translation one more time.
And it came to pass in the night that the word of the Lord came to Nathan, saying.
All right. And it came to pass in the night. Now, Ba-Lila is in the night, right? Because the patak under the bait, and the dagesh in the lamed shows that it's definite, right? It has the definite article mixed in there, in the night. How about the ha-hu right after it? Ba-Lila ha-hu. Anybody? Yeah, it's the demonstrative adjective coming right after it. So, in that night, right? So, that very night, you might say. In that very night. In the night, that one. That one. Okay, and it was in that night. What kind of a clause do we have here in these first three words? Do we have a sentence yet? And it was in that night. What's that? It's a temporal clause, right? And we can either say, and it came to pass in that night or during that night, or we can just begin the temporal clause and leave off the vayhi. During that night, comma. Now, what's going to mark our main clause after a temporal clause? a vav consecutive. Is that what we have here as the next word after the Atnak? Vayhi, vav consecutive, right? So during that night, or we might say and during that night, beginning of verse 4, and then our main